Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to the next in our feature around how we can recover from COVID using nature at the heart of things. And we have with us today some great folks from the CPAWS Nova Scotia chapter. We're going to be talking about Birch Cove Lakes. But before we get to that, I'm going to ask Eugenia to give us a little bit on housekeeping.
Okay, welcome everybody. I can see people are slowly trickling in. I think the internet is slower than usual. So I'll just have a few minutes for housekeeping. So for those of you that are just joining us now, your videos and speakers should be muted. And if you're listening via phone, please make sure that your phone is muted so that we are reducing any background noise. Today we have very special guests. We have Caitlin and Chris joining us from CPAWS Nova Scotia. Each speaker will have about 12 to 15 minutes to speak. I know Janet is going to be starting us off, and we will be leaving some time at the end for questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A box. It should be at the bottom of your screen if you're watching on your computer. I will be monitoring all of these questions, and at the end, we will be bringing these questions to Chris, Caitlin, and Janet. If you have any urgent questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and I'm sure that our speakers would love to answer them during their presentations as well. And at the end of this webinar, please feel free to complete our survey. We'd love to know how we did and how we can improve on these webinars. Thanks.
Thanks, Eugenia. So I guess we're about ready to get started. As we said today, we're talking about ecological gems that are in our cities. And this is a big, I guess it's really surprising when you actually start to reach out and hear about other activities that are happening across Canada. We've talked mainly about Southern Ontario, but I'm very excited today to be able to reach across to Nova Scotia and hear a little bit about the ecological gem that is in their city. Next slide, please, Eugenia. First, a very brief introduction about Wildlands Sake. So we've been around since 1968. Our mission is to protect nature, and we're experts in conservation. Thank you. Next slide. That's me having a fun day at work, flying over one of the forestry units in northeastern Alberta. So we do get around, and we like to work on projects that are exciting and innovative and new. Next slide. For any of you that attended any of the previous webinars, and I'm going to be very short today, but just a reminder that what we're trying to do is think at a landscape level about our thinking. And we have been focused very much on how do we get urban protection, get restoration and green infrastructure and rural protection and stewardship all to work as a piece. Next. So we create this network of nature. And that's the kind of thinking that we're trying to bring to bear. And we believe that that will actually be helpful in establishing the restoration economy, which could help Canada recover from COVID. Next slide. So, and of course, having nature close to us means that we've got nature that we can access. And that is really going to help us all, not just in terms of jobs, but also in terms of mental, physical, and spiritual health as we recover from COVID. So next slide. And then I'm going to turn it over to the team in Nova Scotia, Caitlin and Chris. I'm going to butt in with some questions though too.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Miller. I'm the Executive Director of the Nova Scotia chapter of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. Today, we're going to talk about a real special place in Halifax called Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes. We've been working to protect this near urban wilderness for the last 20 years. And I think we've made pretty good progress, but there's still more work to do. My colleague Caitlin will be walking through the presentation today, and both Caitlin and myself are available for questions and discussion.
Great, thanks, Chris. We can go to the next slide, Eugenia, when you're ready. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in today. I'd like to start this presentation by just acknowledging that we're coming to you from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I think it's important when we're talking about conservation that we recognize the role that Indigenous communities like the Mi'kmaq played in stewarding and caring for this land for generations before us. So I'll start there. I'm just going to walk you through a few photos of Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes. This is one of Chris and his partner Darren in the wilderness. Eugenia, you can go to the next slide when you're ready. This is one of Ash Lake, which is a backcountry lake in Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes wilderness area. It's a bit of a trek to get up there, and I've never actually been myself, but it's a beautiful, peaceful place when you make it up there. All of these photos are from our friend and the wonderful landscape photographer, Erwin Barrett. So you'll see his name pop up a number of times as we walk through some of these photos. Next slide, please. Here's a hiker in the woods in Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes still. One of the best parts about this, this area is that you can be minutes from the city and still feel like you are completely lost in the woods. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Caitlin, can I just ask you, what kind of forest is that? Maybe you can just go back that slide. I just want to, maybe you can describe it a little bit for anybody who's on the phone or who can't see it.
Sure. Chris, actually, can I pass this one off to you? You are the expert on the woods out here.
Most of the forest in Nova Scotia is Acadia Forest, which is a southern temperate type forest, so a mixture of hardwood and conifer forests. This particular valley is a really nice stand of yellow birch and red spruce and black spruce. So you're really at a transition zone in Nova Scotia between the northern boreal forest and the more southern temperate forest.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Next slide, please. This is a photo of a Stillwater between two lakes in the backcountry, and you can see a couple of paddlers canoeing down. One of the best ways to actually see Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes is from the water, because there is such an extensive networks of lakes back here. So this is one of those photos. Next slide, please. And here's one of my favorite sunset shots over a lake. So for those of you who may have been to Halifax before, you may not have heard or have been to Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes, but hopefully these photos give you a bit of a taste of what it's like back here, and encourage you to come on your next trip. Next slide, please, Eugenia. So just to zoom out to the city for a second, there's a bit of a misconception sometimes that Halifax is a small East Coast city, but it's actually Atlantic Canada's largest urban center. We have a population of 400,000 in the municipality, and 300,000 of those are actually in the urban core. And people come here for a number of reasons, but a lot of them to enjoy the benefits of living in a city, the services, the job opportunities. But Halifax is also known because it is so close to wilderness. So people can live in the city, but have easy access to nature just outside their front doors. And one of these areas, of course, of wilderness is Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of how close we are from downtown Halifax to Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes, here's a map. So it's only about 10 kilometers or so, about 15, 20 minutes in the car. As a student, I also took the bus out there a number of times, so it's accessible by public transit. I have some friends who will bike out there from the city, so if you're feeling energetic, that's also an option. So this really is an area that's accessible to many, many people in Halifax. Next slide, please. I have a polling question here. Why is near urban wilderness important to you? So I'll ask Eugenia to post this up on the Zoom chat, and you can choose from a few options. So we have good for your health, outdoor recreation, protection of wildlife, ensuring clean water, or all of the above. Maybe a bit of a hard choice.
Just gonna wait a few more seconds for the answers to come in.
Thanks.
I know, I always find it a shame that we can't actually respond as well, because that would totally skew the results, right? The hosts and panelists cannot vote.
Okay, all right.
What do we get? There we go. All of the above. So clearly there are a lot of reasons to protect near urban wilderness. So thanks for participating, everyone.
Can I just comment that nobody chose individually just clean water? I thought that was interesting too. Okay.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Next slide when you're ready, Eugenia. Great. So I'll focus on the conservation reasons for protecting near urban wilderness for a second. So, I mean, the major argument for protecting Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes, the reason it's so significant here is because it's in close proximity to half of all Nova Scotians. So it's accessible to a huge number of people. But beyond that, and in terms of just ecological features, we see intact forest habitat here. There's a network of headwater lakes. So these are lakes that are at the top of the watershed, that are fed mainly by rainwater, and that are less vulnerable to being polluted by contaminants in runoff. So that's really quite special in a city to see lakes with water of this quality. You don't see that in many other places in Canada. There's also an abundance of species that live here. Chris and I were talking before this presentation, and he told me that before I joined on, there was a bio-blitz that happened in Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes for a day, and there were over 800 species identified in that 24-hour period. So there are a number of species that find habitat here. Some birders have also been in and identified 175 species of those. And there are also some rare species that can occasionally be found. So provincially endangered mainland moose and threatened common nighthawk are a couple of those. So really the combination here of the ecological features and the proximity of Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes to so many people, it really makes this place special, and it makes this place, in our view, the quality of a national park. So next slide, please. And just to come back to the people aspect of this. So Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes is a place for people. This is a spot that people can come for a number of reasons, whether they're looking for a space for recreation, whether they're looking to recharge and rebuild their physical or mental well-being, whether they want to come on an adventure with their friends, or just find some peace and quiet. So really we want this to be an area where anyone can come to have their best day, to go swimming in a lake with some friends, go for a hike, go for a paddle, and remember the day for a long, long time, or for somebody to come on a bad day and be able to find some solitude and some peace and quiet to collect their thoughts. So really the value of Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes really comes from what it can offer the community of Halifax and the broader Nova Scotia community. There are a number of recreational opportunities here that are a possibility, anything from hiking, mountain biking, canoeing, kayaking, swimming, even snowshoeing and skiing in the wintertime. Next slide, please. There are a few major threats facing Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes at the moment. The most concerning is suburban sprawl. So you can see on this map that the green highlighted sections are the public lands that are protected as part of Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes. And you can kind of see the development that's encroaching on it on all sides. So really the development in this area, it's very spread out, it's not always planned, and it's a constant threat. And this is really the threat that is pushing our quick timeline. It provides a lot of urgency to us in protecting and completing this park as soon as possible. Public land disposal. So there was a period where the provincial government was trading or selling off pieces of public land to solve problems in other parts of the province. And this was resulting in a dwindling public land system. But as the public became more aware of this issue and demanded protection for Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes, this became much less of an issue. And now there's a process that would be public if the government wanted to trade off or sell off any pieces of these public lands. And you might notice that there's a bit of a weird gap in Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes, like a thin strip that's pointed out by the red arrow. This is a proposed corridor for Highway 113. This highway came about it's been planned since the 90s. It went through an environmental assessment for 10 to 15 years. It's a very outdated plan, but it's technically still on the books, and it still threatens to cut right through the park, right down the center, as we can see. So that's also a threat on our radar.
Sorry, Caitlin, we just stop there for a sec?
Sure.
I just want to ask a question or make the comment that I made yesterday when we were going through this, which is what really struck me as very interesting is when we were doing Rouge National Urban Park, when we started that process, it was a series of pieces, kind of like this, where you've got like a green area, then it's separated by, this one's still not protected, then you've got a proposal going through the middle of the park, and then you've got another parcel. And so in a way, this actually reminds me very much of the Rouge process, in the sense that you're trying to amalgamate different parcels and make the sum of the parts greater than those individual pieces. So it's actually a really exciting project, I think, because of that, because it once it's all combined, it will be much greater than the individual pieces, and so much more valuable. And then I'll maybe just go back to the other water piece, which is, I know Chris, you had talked about this yesterday, was just in terms of the water and the fact that it's the headwaters. I think is also really fascinating about this, right? Chris, maybe you want to speak to that.
Sure, I'll say two things. So I think comparing it as kind of like a jigsaw puzzle is a really good way to talk about near urban wilderness protection. It's never straightforward. It's always complicated. In our case, for Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes, it's involved 3 levels of government at different times, try to bring together the various pieces. I think what's really crucial is for the public to advocate for the bigger vision, the longer term vision, and being able to work with governments to be able to put the pieces into place. I think that's what we're trying to do here in Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes. And as Caitlin has alluded to, we've been successful at preventing the public land from being sold off like it was in the past by placing a legal protection on those public lands. That legal protection means that it can no longer be done quietly behind closed doors without the public knowing. It has to be done with a public debate. And because this is a place that's so loved by so many people, that's not something that the government is prepared to do anymore, I don't think, I hope. So anyway, so there's lots of different steps, but the continuity through this is that the community has been engaged from the beginning. The community is asking for this protection, and they are bringing governments along toward their vision. With respect to the water, yeah, one of the significant things about this place is it contains headwater lakes. So it's a very small watershed. In Nova Scotia, our watersheds are quite tiny because we're a peninsula. And so you're never more than 30, 40 kilometers from the ocean. So most of our watersheds tend to be really small. For Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes, there's about 19 lakes that are within the protected area. Most of those are headwater lakes, so they're fed either by spring water or predominantly by rainwater. And what that means is that there's not a lot of pollution coming into those lakes from sources farther away. So in sort of other parts of Canada, we have very large watersheds and rivers that travel hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. You can actually contaminate a place from something that's happening way upstream. For this particular watershed, that's not the case. It's a small watershed, so there's a better ability here to maintain water quality from the decisions that are made locally.
Fascinating stuff. Sorry, Caitlin, go ahead.
No, that was great. And actually there's some more maps that will come up later on that show the jigsaw puzzle aspect. I like that image. Next slide when you're ready, Eugenia. So building off of Chris's point that this was led by the public and community action, Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes has come this far. There has been progress made because of public voices. So this is really a community-driven project. In the 70s, the ecological value of Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes was first kind of recognized. And in the 90s, a campaign started to demand protection for this area. And we're still working on that campaign, still growing it. But the government has been very slow to act. So it has required a lot of action from the public. Quick note on this photo. So this is a student hike I led when I was in university and a volunteer for CPAWS Nova Scotia. Bit of a funny story. I wanted to plan a springtime hike to bring some students out to this area and show them what it was like. So I planned the hike for April, but the night before, the weather system decided there was one last snowstorm in our future. So we got completely snowed in, and it ended up being a bit more of a winter hike. But we got there on the bus, and it was a really, really epic day. So that's what that photo is from.
I just want to point out, Caitlin's in that photo. You can see her there.
I am. I'm in the back with a blue hat. Next slide, please. So to give you a bit more of a timeline, in 2006, this is when the municipality finally committed to creating the regional park. So this is the conceptual boundary that was included in the regional plan, which is essentially like the blueprint for development in the city. So this was a significant step. Next slide, please. So in 2009, the provincial government stepped in and started protecting the public lands that were a part of this conceptual boundary for the park. So they designated a wilderness area on a portion of those public lands in 2009, and then they expanded it in 2015. So currently these public lands account for about 1,700 hectares, which is about 70% of the park currently that is protected and public. Next slide, please. So it took the municipality a number of years to follow through and act on its plan from 2006. It wasn't until 2018 that it was actually able to acquire its first private property adjacent to the public lands that had been protected by the province. So the first property it purchased in 2018 was the Hobson's Lake property that you can see in the darker orange color. And then in 2019, the city received a huge boost from the federal government's Challenge Fund. So this funding provided an incentive, it provided a timeline for the city to move forward and purchase more private properties and complete the vision for the park. So in 2019, they were able to acquire 2 more properties, which are in the lighter orange color there. The other player that's involved in this is the Nova Scotia Nature Trust. So they're currently working to acquire the property in red. And this is a key property because it's a connector piece. It connects a couple of big portions of the jigsaw puzzle in the public lands that are protected. And it's expected that the challenge funding will also come in handy when acquiring this property as well. So overall, there has been, it's a bit of a patchwork, but the park has come a long way since the public started getting involved in the 90s. And really the federal government's Challenge Fund did go a long way in pushing this project forward. There's some more work to be done, of course, and we can see this especially in the blue highlighted section to the southeast. And this area, it's all still privately owned, but it's really key to the park. It's the area that's accessible to the most people. It's closest to the city. It's kind of the interface between the city and the park. So these lands are most critical in acquiring and adding to Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes at this point. Next slide, please. Great. So where do we go from here? As I said, the most urgent issue is to complete the land purchases, so to acquire those properties closest to the city. There is opportunity here for federal investment. As we've seen in the past, it has gone a long way to further the vision for Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes. So additional funding for more land purchases would be a huge boost. There are other opportunities, for example, anything from park planning to trail development to creating a nature interpretive center. There's a number of ways the federal government can play a constructive role in completing this park. And then there's the question of the National Urban Park. So as I've mentioned multiple times throughout this presentation, Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes is a wonderful piece of nature that's very accessible to a lot of people. We know that Parks Canada has legislation that allows the designation of national urban parks, and we believe Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes could be a good candidate for that. So there is interest to have more conversations about what that might look like, of course, in conjunction with the local community. But there's lots of opportunity here. And next slide, please. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Caitlin. That was hugely helpful, and I just absolutely love the images from Erwin. It's especially this last one that you just finished on. It's just it's just so popping with color. It's amazing. Yeah, you got to tell him many kudos and thanks for doing these great images. It's really beautiful.
I'll certainly pass that along to Erwin. I gotta say, Erwin is an extremely talented photographer. This photo that's on the screen right now took him 2 or maybe even 3 years to get this photo because he was waiting for the right conditions. So it had to be a very cold fall morning with the sunrise coming up with the steam on the lake. And the first year he went, it wasn't the right conditions. So he came back the next year and got the photo. So yeah, he really is a big friend to the work that we're doing out here, and we appreciate his efforts.
Mm-hmm. Some of the other similarities I'm just going to draw with Rouge National Urban Park is that you say you've been working on this for 20 years, and I know that the groups around Rouge worked on it for 30 years until it was an overnight success. So I have every faith that you're going to do this in record time, under 30 years. And so that shows deep commitment by the people who are connected with the park and the initiative. And I know, Chris, you've told me a number of times that if anybody wants to get any meeting in Nova Scotia, they just have to say it's about the park and everybody shows up. So that's kind of cool.
Some Halifax city councillors make that joke that
yeah,
we want to get people to come out to a boring meeting. They just pretend it's about the Birch Cove Lakes.
That's actually quite funny. The other thing I didn't know was that I think it was Caitlin. You said there was 20% of Nova Scotians live within, or 21% live within a certain distance of the park or are close to it.
Yeah, half of all Nova Scotians.
Oh, half. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, my apologies. That's pretty impressive. And then with Rouge, we've got 7 million Canadians, which is 20% of Canada within an hour of Rouge National Urban Park. So it's amazing that we still got these places that are providing natural ecosystem benefits in areas where we have densely populated places like Halifax. And as we have seen with COVID, the demand and the desire for Canadians to get out into nature and be part of nature is actually growing. So it's even more important now than ever to protect these places. Eugenia, did you have some questions from the group?
Yes, I was just so excited about all the stories you were telling, so I was quietly listening. Thank you so much, Caitlin and Chris and Janet, for your presentations. It was great to hear these stories. We have some time now for some questions, so if any of our viewers have questions, please write them in the Q&A box now. I do have some questions that our audience have written in ahead of time. So one of the questions is, there's been a lot of efforts underway to rewild our cities, for example, through native planting, habitat restoration, but how do we ensure the well-being of animals that we invite into these spaces, and how can we avoid building ecological traps and sinks?
I'll answer this one. That's a very good question. So restoration is absolutely really critical, particularly in places where there's quite a bit of previous disturbance, and yet there's still a need for having access to nature and clean air and clean water. For our Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes campaign, however, our focus is predominantly on protecting places that are still intact before they're lost to suburban development or other anthropogenic threats. So our priority has mostly been to protect the high quality habitat. We do know, though, as the full vision for the park is completed and a couple of key properties are purchased where there is a stronger human footprint, that there will need to be work on restoration and making sure that the native species are able to occur there in perpetuity. But our priority right now really is on securing the intact habitat that's here. That being said, the vision for Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes is that the entire wilderness be protected, and that this link into the Halifax Green Belt, which is a broader sort of green belt for the city that includes the protection of other ecologically significant areas. So as this place becomes restored, the wildlife and species that occur there, they won't be in islands that are separated and stranded from the broader landscape. They'll be in a green belt system that's connected to other wild places.
Yeah, I think similarly, I mean, that's one of the reasons that we're doing this whole project is because we actually think it's about building a network of natural areas. Some of those will be intact, some of those will be places that we can restore, but protect the remnant natural areas. But we really do need to make sure that they're connected. So for example, if you look at Rouge National Urban Park, it's the last connector between the lake and the Oak Ridges Moraine. It connects to Algonquin, it connects to the Greenbelt, and that goes over the top. And then we've actually got the two ravines, the Humber and the Don in Toronto. And if they're certainly right now being projects moving forward to do restoration work there. And then actually having the Meadowway, which is another project that goes in a horizontal fashion across Toronto. So having all of these various connectors work in a way that creates a network of natural areas is, I think, important. And that's also how we're thinking of the Windsor project, that it's not enough to just do a national urban park with the Ojibwe shores and that sort of a complex of puzzle pieces of protection, but actually that we need to build green infrastructure so it creates that greater resiliency and it gives nature places to go, because that's what we've done. We've cut off nature from so much else. And in fact, even going beyond the cities, we are imagining with our Rouge project that, and we started to think about this, I don't have a current slide to show you right now, but one of the projects that we've been working on is, can we connect natural areas and protection from Georgian Bay to Algonquin, and actually from the Greenbelt all the way up to Algonquin. And right now we've built the puzzle pieces that look like we could do it. And we're working with 23 other groups on executing that. It basically starts with an idea, sometimes an audacious idea, like protecting such a large area in Halifax, or can you connect the Rouge to Algonquin, which seems like just ridiculous. But when you set your mind to it and start to see what everybody else is doing, sometimes the puzzle pieces start to emerge. So I think that it's really important to be audacious enough to have those ideas and then go and test with everybody and be open to other people, whether it's forestry companies or a city council who could help you do it. Yeah. Eugenia?
Yeah, that was great. And then following up on that, we have another question here. Often cities want to sell public parks to developers. Is this a legitimate area for a parks association to become involved in?
I'm gonna let you go, Chris or Caitlin. Do you guys have a parks association associated with Birch Cove Lakes?
The Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, we've been working there for about 20 years. There's a lot of other groups that are also working to protect Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes. There is a Friends organization that has formed in the last couple of years, and we collaborate with them. Caitlin, in her presentation, mentioned the Land Trust that is trying to acquire one of the key properties. We have a long history of working with them. With regard to the specific question about selling off of parkland, Caitlin alluded to this in her presentation, that one of the biggest threats historically facing Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes was that the provincial government was using it to solve issues in other parts of the province. So it was kind of a bank that they were withdrawing from. And the public had no idea really this was happening. The only time that the public would find out about it is if they took the time to try to research it and find the order in council or a change in property ownership. And when we actually initially early on in our campaign started diving into this, we realized that quite a few really important areas that are currently privately owned were publicly owned not too long ago. So in Nova Scotia, the legislation that we advocated for the protection of the public lands at Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes is a protected wilderness area. The wilderness area legislation requires a public debate before that designation can be removed. So what that would mean would be that the sneaky sort of backroom deals that governments sometimes make selling away public assets is no longer possible for Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes. And sure enough, as soon as that designation was put in place, there hasn't been 1 acre of Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes that has been sold that is under protection.
That's very interesting. I know that with the creation of Rouge National Urban Park, like it used to be all these different puzzle pieces that had different levels of protection from municipal, regional, provincial, up to federal in some cases. But by unifying all of those under one piece of legislation at the federal level, it created not only the unified protection, but the fact that it's a park meant that it had to meet or had to be moving towards ecological integrity. And even though they weren't selling off the lands, it actually is even better now because of the ecological integrity. Because let's say, for example, a developer comes and offers the park owner, oh, we don't want to buy your land, we just want you to do this kind of activity on your project and we'll give you X number of dollars. The Rouge National Urban Park superintendent has the ability to say no now, because it would be a non-conforming use with its primary mandate, which is ecological integrity. So it takes it from not only can't you sell it, but you can't do certain activities that would actually be downgrading the ecological integrity. And that was one of the big pushes for us in terms of wanting to see Rouge as a national urban park. And I'm assuming for Birch Cove Lakes, this would also be a desirable outcome.
Yeah, if I can take a moment to talk about some of the federal role in this, because that is pretty new, but it's been very effective to date. So the Challenge Fund funding that was provided by the federal government really encouraged the municipality to purchase a couple of properties. As Caitlin pointed out in her presentation, the city made a commitment to protect this area in 2006, but didn't get around to making the first purchase until 2018. That's a very long time. when the federal government started investing in these land purchases, things started to move very quickly. So, within the next year after that first land purchase, there were 2 large purchases that took place after that. And the federal government has also provided funding to Nova Scotia specifically for land purchases for conservation. So we anticipate that will help with the land trust purchase as well. But in terms of sort of what comes next for Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes and the community sort of defining what should happen here, the protection of the ecological integrity that would be afforded under a national urban designation is of interest to us. We see that it's worked well, or seems to have worked well so far for Rouge. And I think it could be adapted to the Halifax situation, which would be some federal investment to help with the land purchases, but then also some partnership between all of the levels of government in terms of planning and managing and ensuring that the ecological integrity is maintained, all of which is sort of monitored and advocated for by the local community, which are really the people that are responsible for the protection of this awesome place in Halifax.
Great. And then we also had a question from Elise. And she says, thanks so much for the great overview of this area. She lives right by here and so uses these trails regularly. And she says, if the Nova Scotia Nature Trust is successful in getting that piece of connector land, but then Highway 113 goes ahead, that might lead to some unfortunate fragmentation. So do we have any idea about the status of this proposed highway and the chances of it going ahead?
I fought that highway for a long time, so maybe I'll start by taking that one. The Highway 113 is a dumb idea. The whole purpose behind it is to save 6 minutes of driving time for people that are driving between the 103 and the 102. It's left over from the last century. It was developed in the 1990s as a proposal. It never had much support. It's probably the most unpopular highway proposal in Nova Scotia, and highway development is pretty popular here, but this one, it's just so strange, and it's such a threat to the ecological integrity of this particular wilderness. As Caitlin mentioned in her presentation, it's still on the books, however. It took 15 years before it got environmental approval, which is a very long time for a project to be stuck in the environmental assessment process. That's because there was quite a bit of problems with it. But it's still on the books. So that wound that sort of goes through the wilderness is still there. So it's very much a threat. What the Nova Scotia government needs to do is just to say this is no longer going to happen, that this is not something that matches the vision of Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes. It's a relic from a prior time, and the city of Halifax has actually changed quite a bit since the 90s. Like development back in the 90s and early 2000s was very spread out. But in the last 10 years, it's really been focused on more density closer to the urban core. And the majority of new development occurring in the city now, is in places where development already exists. So there's less need for large scale highway projects like this. So I'm hoping that the government will come around and officially end this proposal. But that will require pressure and advocacy from the public to ensure that that's done. Because it absolutely is a threat, and it's very close to the Nova Scotia Nature Trust property.
Great, thanks, Chris. And then I have another question here from the audience. How much of a factor is the big quarry on the east side of this wilderness area in its continued protection?
Do you want me to try this one, Chris, and you can fill in?
Sure, go ahead, Kayla.
Okay. So the big quarry is privately owned, and it's actually outside of the conceptual boundary for Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes Wilderness Park. So it's not within that boundary that I showed you from that 2006 map in the regional plan for the city. It was proposed for development a few years ago, actually, but the municipality turned that down. So yeah, it's private land. It's outside of the boundary. You might have something to add to that, though, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, that's a quarry that's been there a long time. And there is kind of a perception that the quarry itself is sort of stopping the development. And I guess for a certain extent, that is happening now. But the people who actually own the land where that quarry occurs are interested in developing it, and they have submitted development proposals to the city. In 2016, as Caitlin mentioned, that proposal was rejected, was not allowed to proceed to secondary planning, which is the next phase in the approval process locally. But we know that there still is significant interest in developing lands all around Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes. So the issue for us is mostly who owns the land and what happens to that land.
Okay, thanks. Janet, do you have anything to add? Oh, muted.
Just unmuting myself, so I forget. I was going to say that I thought there was a question there about whether or not there was limitations on, I think it was zoning for parkland, and then you had to do it within 1 year timeline, and that exists in Halifax. And there's a question on whether or not that happens elsewhere in Canada. And I would just say that right now, it's entirely possible. None of the projects we've worked on have we had that challenge, but I think every municipality creates its own suite of challenges, and especially when you have lands that are owned by different levels of government, you get all of these conflicting problems. And so one of the solutions is turning to a tool like a national urban park. And I know certainly in Windsor, we've got a situation there where there's a belief that by unifying all of these parcels of land into one designation, that it will actually help create more consistency, greater resources, and better outcomes, quite frankly. And that doesn't just mean in terms of the parkland, it actually means in terms of the city as well, because many of these places are helping with floodwater management or drought or resiliency in terms of climate change. So while we may be very focused on what it does in terms of the natural values, for municipalities, many times these new urban protected areas are creating other assets for the city that provide ecosystem services for those cities. And as we are in a more constrained environment with fewer and fewer places for nature, these become ever more valuable to municipalities, even in managing their own budgets.
Yeah, we're seeing the same sort of thing here for Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes. It's only becoming more significant with time. And I think that's become even more apparent since the pandemic. The very first thing that opened up when things started to get a little bit better here in Nova Scotia were the parks. And the government said, people need to be able to get out into nature for their well-being. And sure enough, lots of people went to the park right away. So there's this, we need it. It's going to become more important as our city continues to grow. These places there's going to be more and more stress placed on these places. So we got to make sure that they're big enough, that they're not destroyed by the use, that they're well managed, and that the ecological integrity is maintained over the long term. With regard to the 1 year and the zoning question specific for Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes, the policy in the regional plan, which is kind of the development blueprint for the city, the official sort of guidance, is that the private lands in Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes won't be zoned regional park until the city has acquired it. The question of preemptive sort of zonation is limited because of that policy. And the person is correct that that initiates a 1 year sort of time period for the city to expropriate or acquire that property. I think at least up until now, the priority really has been on securing investments, a piece of the municipal budget, the provincial budgets, and the federal budgets, to actually purchase lands that are for sale, or where there's a willing seller and a willing buyer. That's kind of the best arrangement when that relationship exists. There has been some challenges with some landowners that have been trying to drive toward development, and that's sort of handled through City Hall and the normal process with approving or not approving developments.
Great, thanks, Chris. And I have one more question here before we end off. How do you see the role of Indigenous peoples in land and water stewardship? And maybe this is a question for Caitlin as well.
Thanks for that. I think in my acknowledgement, I mentioned that at the beginning. Chris can expand, I think, more on the actions that CPAWS Nova Scotia in particular is taking with involving Indigenous communities in conservation and stewardship today. My acknowledgement at the beginning was simply to recognize that this beautiful area that we are trying to protect today, Blue Mountain-Birch Cove Lakes, and all other areas in Nova Scotia, have, of course, been cared for, been under the stewardship of Indigenous peoples for generations. But Chris, do you want to talk at all about other work we're doing?
Well, I just want to say it's really the most important thing, that there's space being created for Indigenous-led conservation. It's very effective. It's the right thing to do. And really, if your brain is not sort of going there, then you're not really going to be relevant in the future on these types of issues, because it's so fundamental. It's a direction that everybody needs to be going. And CPAWS in Nova Scotia, we're prioritizing that and trying to work wherever we can collaboratively with First Nations on Indigenous-led projects.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just support that. That's the same for us with Wildlands Sake. I know that Rouge National Urban Park, they have a circle of Indigenous nations that are working with the park in terms of creating the park management plan, the execution, the implementation, making sure that the desires and the objectives of the Indigenous nations are being met, whether it's planting native plants or medicinal plants, and providing ceremony and cultural space. I think all of that is they're trying to incorporate that. And certainly with the Windsor National Urban Park, we're working directly with Chief Caldwell Chief Duckworth from Caldwell First Nation, and her desire to see this as a new national urban park in Windsor. I think we're only going to see more and more of that, and maybe national urban parks are a kind of cutting edge. I just literally about an hour ago got off the phone with somebody from Alberta who's talking about an Indigenous nation there wishing to see a new national urban park potentially, where it has a slightly different model, where you could even imagine that the Indigenous nation continues to own the land, but Parks Canada helps in the implementation and the management. So there's different models that are possible, I think, and thinking outside of our boxes is going to be key, as Chris alludes to.
Great, thanks so much. And that brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you so much for our audience members as well for submitting some fantastic questions. And thank you so much for Caitlin and Chris for joining us today.
Yeah, many thanks, everybody.
Have a good week. Bye.